The social contract is an intangible ethical code which determines how people in a given society interact with one another, and what privileges certain people may be entitled to while others are not. As such, the social contract is sometimes associated directly with the rule of law, but is, in American society, often something that is kept off of the books. We see it modernly in the gaps that exist between the very rich and the very poor, and also in the cultural chasms that separate groups like Black Americans and white Americans, working men and working women. In her essay Fuck the Police State, Joy James writes the American Leviathan is a corporate state. While disintegrating capitalism breeds militarism and fascism, the mechanistic corporate state begets cyborg democracy. The legal narratives of the American Leviathan indicate that the machine is the person. This warp reenacts the enslavement-era loop where, in the interests of white civil society and consumers, black people became property and then persons. Joy James would argue that, in capitalist America, while a corporate entity rules as a person, the working class is bound beneath it, especially minority citizens who are statistically promoted and aided less in such a setting. By the system, it is difficult to discern the differences between colonial slave ownership and modern working class imprisonment. While the corporate body exists as a person and having such control over the lives of the employed persons, it holds a chain similar to that of the literal slave owner. People become mechanized parts before they are seen as human beings, and in this way, both the working class and minority groups are often victimized by the social contract. We see a similar victimization in Susan Bickford's Constructing Inequality, in which she writes, "Viewed from different angles, gates have different social meanings. A gate that indicates safety and security to a resident of a middle-class development can communicate danger, keep out, to residents of the poor neighborhood it borders." Bickford would argue that, based on class or race, the construction of a community can mean entirely different things, and in certain ways city construction is based in a bias toward the white upper class and middle class. In this way, cities are often split economically, with the rich living in certain more decent districts while the poor are placed in broken neighborhoods or slums. The gates that surround certain communities mean different things in this case, with the upper class citizens finding them to be protective measures, while the lower class may see themselves as being caged out of a community, not unlike wild animals. While this is not necessarily practiced de facto, it is a principle by which real estate can often work, attempting to express to potential buyers that a neighborhood is cleaned out of all but common white upper class citizens. A reason for the social separation that exists may be explained by pre-existing notions that run amok in modern society. In many ways, the American mind has been programmed to see the differences between races and classes of people. The documentary Race, The Power of an Illusion explains that the idea of race is a social construct, that it is not necessarily biologically true, and that it is a theory that is instead ascribed onto biology. For example, there is the general idea that black men and women have a natural propensity towards high-velocity sporting events, when in fact many tribes in Africa consist of shorter, stockier people who are physically unsuited for the sport. There exist certain Western stereotypes as to the lifestyle and biology of the African or Caribbean man, some that are so false that our perception of the African American or the Caribbean American is heavily distorted. In Robert Wesley's essay, White Normativity and the Racial Rhetoric of Equal Protection, he writes the concept of race was formed in the crucible of scientific speculation in an age marked by encroaching secularism, advancing nationalism, and a seemingly obsessive interest in imposing rational order on the chaos of new discoveries. Essentially, a great deal of Western thought on race is grounded in scientific work that is both entirely outdated and largely false. In many ways, there is no science to the concept of race, yet as Americans, it is often difficult not to try and apply a formulaic theory behind our society. Sadly, we have not as a nation moved past these notions, and it is by them that we form these invisible constructs that separate peoples from one another, even in a single nation. Such is how the social contract continues to thrive even in modern society.